Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Transformation. Before we go any further, I want to frame this episode with a story that will feel familiar to today's guest, but also to all of you in some capacity. So, Sol Price, he built FedMart, then Price Club, on one rule: keep the margin and pay people more than you have to because you actually want to serve them. He believed his real job wasn't to make money, it was to be a fiduciary to the customer and to create more value than he extracted. The idea outlived him. It became Costco. Sounds simple, but when we get into it, it isn't. And that's one of the stories that Eric opens his new book with. The more trust a company builds, the more pressure it feels to trade that trust for something that like profit. Eric calls that pull financial gravity. We will delve into exactly what that means and why this story is not necessarily a story about bad people, but more so about inadequate, polarized and corrupt systems where people are doing exactly what those structures reward them for doing. So I'm delighted to welcome Eric Ries, author of The Lean Startup, first of all, the book that gave a generation of founders a method for building things that people actually want. And now he's back with his new book, Incorruptible: Why Good Companies Go Bad and How Great Companies Stay Great. And with the harder question of, once you've built something people want, how do you protect and preserve both your mission and your company, even well after your time? Eric, welcome to the show. It's a privilege to have you.
Thank you so much.
Eric, can we go back to, I'm going to say, from build, measure, learn to protect what you built, and to protect what you built in the form of an incorruptible company, which you describe as structurally, intrinsically, and permanently soulful. I love that definition. It really spoke to me. Can we go back to the story of Sol Price and look at what happened there and why corruption can be framed essentially as a design flaw as opposed to a character flaw?
Yeah, I really appreciate the way that you framed up the story and introduced it because this is something that people really struggle with. And even I was doing a AMA on an online forum and I got hundreds of questions. It was great. But I actually had people use this story, not knowing it was in the book, to try to argue the
Really?
opposite
Okay.
point. Yeah, to
Brilliant.
try to explain to me that I don't understand that this is really a personal story. And I'm like, hey, actually, when you read the book, you're really going to like this. And I got news for you. So, all right, let's set the scene. You mentioned some of Saul Price's philosophy of business. He's really a great entrepreneur who is not as well known today as I think he should be. So let's go back in time. We're talking about the 1950s. Saul was a lawyer. And when he was a lawyer, he had this fiduciary duty to his client. That's how he was trained. So that means you put the client's interest before your own. So it was very natural for him when he became a retailer to become a fiduciary to the customer. He had his fiduciary hierarchy. He said it should be customers first, employees second, shareholders last.
Shareholders last.
Yeah. The great Peter Drucker said, no, that's backwards. It's supposed to be employees first, customers second, shareholders last. If you read the Johnson & Johnson famous Our Credo, it's doctors, patients, and nurses first, employees second, communities third, shareholders last. But hopefully you're picking up the pattern
Yeah,
in these really
shareholders
great
last.
companies. Yeah, exactly. Not because
Of
shareholders aren't important, but because
course.
the way we create shareholder value is by serving these other constituencies. Okay, so that was the company FedMart that he created. And FedMart was one of those companies that inspired rabid loyalty in its customers. People would drive miles out of their way to shop there. Well, Saul took the fiduciary thing super seriously. So, for example, if a competitor had a certain product at a lower price, Saul would put up a sign in his own store telling people to go buy the product there. So he wanted you to know whether you could get the lowest price if it wasn't with him. Anyway, it was hundreds of these little things that together created a company with an ethos. It stood for something. As a result, it prospered. Employees were well paid. Investors made terrific returns. Saul became a wealthy man. He took the company public. And if you believe in the kind of fairy tale version of our economic system, where companies compete to produce the best products, therefore create the most value, and therefore shareholders compete to get access to and invest in the companies that will give them the best returns by creating the best products, then you should expect that Saul's investors were thrilled. He made them a lot of money. The company was growing and thriving year after year after year after year. But that's not what happened. Everybody listening knows that's not what happened because we all understand this financial gravity intuitively. Saul was in a nonstop battle with his investors for 20 years. They were constantly on him to make them more money. And what did they think would get them more money? The so-called best practices. Saul believed in low prices and high wages. They wanted high prices and low wages. They understood, I think perversely, something that Saul didn't. which was that precisely because FedMart was so trusted by its customers, that FedMart could betray its customers and get away with it. So once you come to believe that FedMart always has the lowest price, now you can safely raise prices and probably people won't check. You can get away with all kinds of stuff, at least in the short term. So that's what the investors wanted. Now, Saul was a completely uncompromising person. He would not do it. So one day in 1975, now this is after the company's been thriving for more than 20 years, mind you. Saul comes to work one day and he can't get into his office because they've changed the locks on his door because he doesn't work there anymore. Just it's one of these terrible stories. And I know there's a lot of grim stories in the book.
Yeah,
stories of people finding ways to make money out of a company without creating value. So the investors thought, and this is very important, the investors thought they were doing this action, get rid of Saul Price, convert the company to their idea of best practices. They thought they were doing this to make more profit. And yet it took them only 7 years to bankrupt the company. By 1982, the company had been completely liquidated. There are no FedMart stores today. FedMart is nothing but a distant memory.
Which you could call karma, I suppose.
It is a reason why people have been telling Aesop's fable of the goose that laid the golden egg for thousands of years.
Absolutely.
This is a recurring problem in our economy, and it has been a recurring problem in our nature as human beings. We do this kind of thing. But the purpose of institutions and financial systems and economics, the whole point is to create a corrective to these flaws in human nature. We're supposed to buttress against these kind of knee-jerk reactions. And what's so interesting to me is if you have an economic system that is amplifying a flaw rather than correcting it, you know something's gone terribly wrong. We pride ourselves in our professionalism. If you told these investors they were killing the golden goose, they would be really offended.
Yeah.
Can you imagine saying that to some of our masters of the universe in the finance industry today? You're killing the golden goose. They would be so offended. How dare you say such a thing, right? Yet that is what we see. Now, I like this FedMart story, and you hinted at this already, as it has a happy ending. Yes, this is grim. This kind of thing's been going on for hundreds of years. I documented in the book. I think the earliest example of this is from 1800. So it's been going on a long time. But unlike a lot of those other stories, this one has a happy ending because Saul was absolutely indomitable. After he was betrayed in this way, he took 2 weeks off, and then he leased the office upstairs from FedMart in the same building.
I love that part of the story.
And yeah, he got right back to work. I said the investors understood something that Saul never did. I think he understood something that they never understood. When investors looked at FedMart, what did they see? They saw an org chart. They saw warehouses. They saw contracts and customers and employees and warehouses full of stuff. They saw the material elements. But they didn't see the engine that made all those things possible. So yes, you can take over a company, but you can't necessarily take over the engine if you don't understand how to operate. So because Saul understood the engine, he understood that he could do it again. He could replicate what had been great about FedMart. He didn't need all the contracts and the money in the warehouse. He could do it again. So he created a new company called the Price Club. Now, when I was growing up, Price Club was like where my family shopped. I didn't know, by the way, that it was named after a guy. I just thought it was the low price club, the place you go to get low prices. I had no idea. Today, Price Club is not that well known. Saul was not the only person who learned how to master this engine. One of his proteges, a guy who had worked his way up from stock boy to executive at FedMart, because Saul believed in promoting and hiring from within, he quit FedMart in protest when Saul Price was fired, and sometime later created his own company, again replicating this engine. And sometime later, his company and Saul's company were to merge to form a combined company that they called Price Costco. But of course, we just call Costco. And this is the deep cut origin story of the founding of Costco, which today is a $400 billion public company, which nonetheless continues to embody Saul's ethos all these years later.
Yeah, and it's just testament to the power of purpose, isn't it? And we say that purpose-driven companies in the Firms of Endearment study outperformed the S&P 500 market over 15 years, from 1,681% compared to 118. So the proof is there. We intellectually know that it works, but that isn't what happens. Can we come to the term financial gravity, in inverted commas, Eric? Why gravity and not temptation or ambition or greed? Why does the physics metaphor, what does it get right that a moral one would not translate?
Yeah, this was very tricky to figure out how to write about this because on the one hand, it's a thing that we've all experienced pretty much every day. And yet we have a tendency to personalize it and want to make it somebody's fault.
Yeah.
not realizing that there is something intrinsic to our situation that causes this behavior. So I was grasping for the right metaphor. And like the investors in FedMart, when we talk about companies, we talk about leadership, we talk about organizations. Me too, okay? I'm not criticizing anybody through anything I don't do myself. We tend to focus on the things we can see and touch and taste and control. Org chart and contracts and employees and culture. And that stuff's very important. Okay, I'm not saying it's not important, but there are these forces that are at work below the surface that you can only experience indirectly, and yet which have this immense impact on organizations. And the reason I came up with the idea of using physics as the metaphor here, I've worked with so many companies. Lean startup became a real phenomenon, and I've had the privilege to work with every kind of company you can name on many continents, in many industries, in different sectors, governments, not yeah, you name it, I've done it. Okay, it's been cool. But I've also watched companies evolve. And so have we all. Think about 5 companies that you've been alive long enough to watch their rise, and now they're big, successful public companies. Have you noticed how, although they began in different countries, decades, industries, with a different values, different style, now that they're big public companies, they're all kind of the same? If you look at their branding, if you read one of their press releases, they're all the same. The fact that they're all the same is the tell. Because if it was just random, you would think it would wind up in a variety of different places. But they're like magnetic filings in the presence of a magnetic field.
Yeah,
All little soldiers lined up in a row. And I think if you ask the people that have done it, did you intend to be the same as everybody else? Not only will they say no, they'll object to the premise of your question. They don't even realize how similar to everybody else they are. They can't see it. So I was like, how do we talk about this phenomenon that it seems to be universal, unconscious, and has this warping effect? In spite of good intentions, it warps. And again, I ask people to think about the last time a favorite brand of yours was acquired by another company or taken over by private equity or went public. I've been doing a bunch of lectures on this book, and when you do that with the audience, I say, okay, before you tell me what happened, anyone have an example where, because of all the vast financial resources of the new acquirer, the product got better? Did the food taste better? Is the restaurant have better service than before? No one's ever raised their hand. It's the predictability of it that shows that there's a force. What happened? Of course, the product got worse because we have built a financial system that is enmeshed in these values of extraction rather than value creation. The most recent one, and then I have people tell me their stories, and they're hilarious and sad. And it's like iced tea or a restaurant, or the most recent one I saw, someone sent me a thing about a tortilla company. Okay, a tortilla company was taken over, and now the tortillas are disgusting. And it's just incredible to me. If you go on Reddit, people get real worked up about these brands because they really care. Like, the customers really care. Why don't the people that run these companies care as much as the customers care? So anyway, that's how I settled on gravity, because gravity, it has this involuntary quality to it. You can say, well, I don't believe in gravity, but guess what? Gravity believes in you. You jump up in the air, you're coming down. Well, the same thing is true of these companies. You could have all the good intentions you want. If you have not structured the company sufficiently so that it is strong enough to resist gravity, you will wind up in the same place as everybody else.
And I love that, because it also, if you pull fast enough or quick enough, it creates a vacuum, doesn't it? And this is a vacuum of trust, what you were saying around what we expect from the companies that we love, the brands that we love, how we expect it to be, feel, be priced, etc. And it brings me back to building organizations. And you're saying we need to pay special attention to the exoskeleton that separates inside from outside. And you call it the art of organizational soulcraft. I love that. Designing the deep structural foundations that give organizations strength, which brings me to governance. And I must admit, Eric, one, I loved your book, couldn't put it down. And two, it's the first time I have been so interested in governance as a topic, not only because your solutions speak massively to my personal values, but also because the blueprint that you give us is so structured, so clear, and so actionable. So I would love you to walk us through a little bit more of this blueprint and answer that question of, so how can we create the conditions to be incorruptible?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for saying that. Let me just say, as an author, writing a book about governance and making it interesting is extremely challenging.
Did a brilliant job of it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. My poor publisher, when I first pitched this book, in their system, it was listed as untitled on governance. So you could just see how miserable everybody was. Like, oh no, what are we going to do with this? Yeah, like what a mess. And it is a very dry topic, the way it is normally talked about.
Yeah.
And I actually realized in the course of writing this that that's going to be our way in, that there is actually something that's been hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
It's been wrapped in this dry, bizarre language to make it seem as inaccessible and unimportant as possible. I give the pop quiz in the book. Pop quiz: if a company has a classified board, does this lead to more or less entrenchment?
Yeah.
And most people can't even parse that sentence.
Yeah.
They're like, what does that mean? And I can explain it in simple terms. It's actually not a very complicated concept at all. It just has this arcane jargon that nobody knows what it is. It's like, oh, okay, that's a fussy thing for lawyers and bankers to worry about.
So
I'll
we
get
just
on with
go,
building my company. Yeah, go on with building my product. And unfortunately, Marty Cakin just wrote a great review of the book, one of the truly great product thinkers in our industry. And he really candidly admitted that this is not something he ever really paid any attention to.
Yeah.
And yet he's had the experience of watching team after team after team that he has coached and to have studied his work and built great products be dismantled by this force. And he never even considered the possibility that there was anything you could do about it.
But it's so foundational. That's one
It's
of the
so
biggest things I take away from your book.
Absolutely. So there is something we can do about it. And what's wild, and I'll explain the blueprint. I'm going to say one more thing as a disclaimer before we do so, because for a lot of your listeners, this is going to seem unbelievable what I'm about to say. Not only is this not some intractable problem, but we know how to solve it. But the solutions, each of the individual elements of the solution, of the blueprint, is something that is well established, studied, and some of the things are like quite old. One of the key techniques dates to the 1880s.
Yeah.
And yet most practitioners have never heard of it. And the question we all have to ask ourselves, the book is kind of framed around these mysteries, like almost like an Agatha Christie whodunit. Like, because why does this happen? Like, everything about this makes no sense. Why would investors want to kill their own golden goose? That doesn't make sense. Why, if these forces are inevitable, are there exceptions? And if these exceptions are based in all this research and knowledge and case studies, how come you had to hear about it from me? So many of the people I work with employ lawyers and lobbyists and activists and bankers and investors. They have this army of advisors of every kind. How come they get paid a lot more money than I do? You only bought this book for $29. Why didn't they mention it to you? What's going on that people don't know this information when it's widely accessible? So
but it's not best practice.
But it's not best practice. And it is so hard for people to imagine that best practices can be value destroying.
Yes.
Partly, I think, because it's right there in the name.
Yeah.
Best is in the name. There's a whole chart in the book called Best Practices Destroy Shareholder Value. You can look at, again, not my opinion, look at the data, look at what the researchers have found, looking at these practices in particular. Okay, the blueprint has what I call the 4 dimensions of the new governance. So I'm trying to make governance interesting. Okay, we're gonna reclaim governance for ourselves.
It's super interesting.
Yeah. Compliance, I'm not going to talk about. Compliance is the first element. Everyone knows that today, if you ask most people what is governance, they pretty much just think it's compliance. So we're going to put that aside. But I'd just say that is important. The second dimension is purpose. This is a question of why does an organization exist? This is something that there's no concept on this planet, I think, that has a bigger disconnect between most people's intuitive understanding of what's going on and the formal legal theory that dominates our world today. So if you ask most people, leaders, board members, executives, employees, customers, investors, just anybody you meet, what's a great company? What makes a company great? Why do people create companies? Why are they good? You will have someone say, well, a great company is one that is like a vital living thing. It produces great products. It competes in the marketplace on the basis of product quality. It tries to create as much value as possible for itself and its employees and its shareholders and its customers. And because it has this value creating engine at the heart of it, it makes the world a better place as a consequence of everything that it does. It creates more value than it captures, in Tim O'Reilly's famous phrase. And I tell people who think that, oh, suckers. Oh, you think that's what a company is? Oh, no, my poor child. I'm sorry, no one told you. According to the legal doctrine that runs our world today, legal doctrine called shareholder primacy, a corporation is nothing more than a financial instrument designed to enrich its shareholders. And when people hear this for the first time, they think I've made it up. They're like, that, Eric, that can't possibly be right. That would be like sociopathic and crazy. No one could possibly think that. I'm like, well, let me introduce you to the huge body of literature of these people who have been advocating for this for the last 40 years. Why do you think we're having all these problems? Because this is the formal legal doctrine. Now, this is not some ancient pillar of capitalism, but I know these days there's a lot of anti-capitalism rhetoric, a lot of people who have turned to attack the very nature And the very idea of creating a for-profit company, again, I
Mm,
understand why they're upset. Look
mm,
around.
yep.
But this is a new thing. You have to really understand how recent this is. The key court cases that established this in the United States date in Delaware in particular date to the 1980s. So
Mm, mm,
not in the grand scheme of things, not that old. So if you want to say that a company exists to do a thing other than enrich its shareholders, and I think most people that create companies, most people that lead companies have quite a few of these extra financial commitments. They either care about, there's like Saul Price, they care about their customers and employees, or
mm,
they care about certain values. They have certain principles that they view as non-negotiable, that are essential to the success of the company.
yeah.
If you have even one of those principles, you are a business revolutionary, whether you know it or not, because you are living in defiance of
Mm,
this universal rule that today governs almost our whole world. Okay. So the first thing we have to do in this blueprint is, like Saul Price did, say who we stand for. Who would we rather die than betray? What are those principles that we're willing to sacrifice on behalf of? That's the first thing.
mm,
The second dimension is the dimension of coherence, alignment. How do we make sure that every single person we touch is aligned to that same mission or to those same values? So this has layers to it. There's the layer of how do we make sure that our management system is always checking to
mm,
see if we're meeting our values, meeting our fiduciary commitments. It's just incredible how much energy modern companies spend into making sure that investors are taken care of. Can we
mm,
spend at least a corresponding amount of time to making sure that our customers, that our product, that our employees are taken care of? I think we can. We have to make sure that our business model is aligned. A lot of companies, the temptation sneaks in when they think their job is to make money by whatever means necessary. That's the doctrine of shareholder primacy holds that. That's not right. We should
mm,
make money by doing as much mission as possible so that making money can become rendered positive. We want it to be a positive thing. There's nothing wrong with
of
making money,
course. No.
but we want it to be aligned to that mission or purpose. And the third layer of this is how do we make sure the culture is aligned so that every person understands that even if no manager is present, if someone calls into the customer service hotline,
Mm,
we have to take care of them. Or we're going to say, I'm sorry, sir. According to page 245 of our terms and service conditions, it seems like we formally can get out of having to help you.
mm, mm,
That choice to do the right thing or not is made hundreds or even thousands of times a day in most
mm,
companies. And managers don't even know. They're not there.
mm,
So that's the domain of culture,
mm,
also very important. So that's the
mm,
dimension of coherence. And the third element of the blueprint is the dimension I call integrity, structural integrity. How do we make and keep promises? And this is where things like the public benefit corp filing that formally changes a company's purpose to becoming more than just for shareholders. Things like making sure that the board of directors is accountable to the mission, making them take the equivalent of the Hippocratic Oath,
mm.
but for directors.
I love
And
that.
then, yeah, and then of course, structures
Mm,
that are surprisingly common in today's world that use a set of outside trustees to hold the board of directors accountable. This is a really important mechanism that has been shown over now more than 100 years to be extremely effective at keeping companies on mission, on track, aligned. Somebody playing the role of what I call the mission guardian,
yeah. Yeah.
protecting these values from outside
Mm,
interference.
and
That's
that's
the
the
blueprint in a nutshell.
yeah, and the idea of mission locked constellations, which we don't have time to bottom out, but I really liked that idea of how you keep that mission where it is and keep it collective as opposed to polarized.
Yeah, thank you.
But before we move on, I would, redefining profit as maximizing human flourishing, I think is the pivotal idea for me in terms of also leadership and culture. And I love the idea of that cycle and the coherence of the culture bank, the leader guide, and the two-way review. Just operationally, how it can help us create the culture that we need. Can you walk us through how it works and how it creates the conditions for maximizing human flourishing?
Okay, so let's take this step by step, piece by piece. I think a lot of people who are kind of have some vague understanding that governance is important. When they pick up a book like this, they're not expecting so much of it to be leadership and operational in its nature. But this is really important because at the end of the day, the root cause of our problems has to do with the splitting off of governance away from operations as if they were separate disciplines, but
Mm,
rather than seeing them as two sides of the same coin. So what you're asking is about some of the operational techniques
mm,
of creating an aligned culture for a company. And again, I always start with aligned to what? And your question about the nature of profit, I think, is very important. As I mentioned, people are starting to turn on for-profit companies as evil or bad intrinsically. Again, I understand because look around. But to me, this all reflects both on the part of the people who are criticizing and the people defending these maligned for-profit companies.
mm,
a misunderstanding of what it means to make a profit in the first place. In the book, as you know, but for your listeners, just know I do give the full derivation of this idea, and including all of its economic justification. So I'll do it in shorthand here, but know that there's more to this. But the culmination of the derivation is to see that the way we define profit today is broken. And the better way to define it is to say that profit is about maximizing human flourishing. That's what it means to make a profit. So a company that is extracting value, harming people and getting away with it, you can say that it's evil, you can say that it's illegal, you can say that it's immoral. Those things are all true. But I'm more interested in, is it profitable? And I think the answer is just no. And once we recognize that, we can work on, first as leaders, and then eventually we can talk about civic institutions too, trying to promote actual profit maximizing activities, meaning human flourishing maximizing activities. So let's say you have an organization now. This can all sound very abstract. Let me give you a scenario. Okay, I'll give a specific scenario, and then we'll talk about how the scenario was achieved. There's a grocery store in Texas called HEB. And if you know anybody that's ever lived in Texas, if you have an hour or two to spare, you can ask them what they think of HEB, and they'll go on a long and poetic rant about how great this company is. And it's so good that the people who shop there often mistakenly think that the letters stand for "Here Everything's Better," when in fact HEB is just the initials of the founder's son from decades ago. Anyways, this is one of these companies that really stands for something. And so here's the situation. There's a winter ice storm in Texas, and people are shopping in an HEB grocery store, and the power goes out. And when I say the power goes out, I mean the backup generators are out. Everything's out. The point of sale system crashes. There's no way for anyone to pay for their groceries. And so inside the store, there's like a collective groan that goes up. Oh, no. Why are people so upset? Did I mention there's an ice storm in Texas? Why do you think they were in the store? Why do people go to a store in the middle of an ice storm? Because they're stocking up, right? So everyone thinks they're going to have to leave empty-handed when the store manager asks everyone to huddle around, jumps up on a counter, says, everyone come, gather around. Just take your stuff and go. Nobody. And they're like, well, how are we going to pay you? You're not going to pay us. Just go. You just take the things you need and go. Customers were in tears. And it's a cool little vignette. Okay. So how was this accomplished? Some people hear the story and they say, wow, what a brave manager. She had the courage to defy corporate and jump up on the table. She probably got fired. Some people say, oh, what a quirky thing to do. Since she couldn't get corporate on the phone, she made a random choice. No, that's all a misunderstanding. This is something they drill for and train for. Not ice storms in particular, but rather instilling in everybody in the company this culture of taking care of the people that work there. So there's actually dozens of these HEB stories. There's the time that they airlifted supplies into a hurricane disaster zone. There's a story of when in the US we had this big hubbub about eggflation a couple of years ago where the price of eggs was skyrocketing. HEB just sold the eggs at below cost because they're like, this is temporary. We're not going to pass the cost on to our consumers. Sure, we'll lose some money, but it's our job to be a shock absorber in the economy. The question people ask is, how do I create a culture like that? It's so aligned to the mission. And these three techniques are the key to doing it. One, the culture bank. Two, the two-way review. Three, the leader's guide. And I'm not going to get into all the details here. We'll focus mostly on the culture bank, which I think is the key concept. The idea, and this is something I learned from really high culture, strong culture company leaders like Howard Schultz or Todd Park. You have this asset. I call it trustworthiness. But there's an asset that's like metaphorically accumulating in your bank account. Whenever you do something that proves to your employees and your customers and everybody else that you are serious about your values. So how do we do that? Well, every time I do something that has a well-defined cost, but an intangible value in defense of my principles, that's like making a deposit in this culture bank. Think about that manager letting the people walk out with the groceries. We can calculate the cost of the groceries that walked out the door down to the last decimal place. Very easy. But what is the value of this story? It's hard to say. It clearly is valuable. Customers were crying. I'm sure the employees who worked there felt it was very meaningful. You can be sure that people have been telling this story to each other for years. How did I hear it? Right? It became a thing, a story that becomes part of the lore of the company and circulates. If you don't create stories like this that circulate, other stories will circulate. Oral transmission is humanity's oldest technology for recording information. So every company has a lore. So that's in making a deposit in the culture bank. And anytime you do the reverse, you take out a spreadsheet and say, we have to stack rank by ROI. Every time you do that, you're making a withdrawal from the
Mm.
culture bank. And companies that have these really strong cultures have a rule. And it's a rule that most leaders, when I tell it to them for the first time, are like, Eric, that's impossible. Nobody can do that. So just bear with me. I know you're going to be your first reaction too, but I can assure you there are people that live by this rule. The rule is only make deposits, never make withdrawals.
Yeah. I really like
That's it.
that.
It's so simple. It's
Yes.
such a simple rule. Clay Christensen, the late great management writer, he said that in his last book, it is easier to do the right thing 100% of the time than 98% of the time. Because if it's 98% of the time, then you have to have a meeting about it every time. So having a simple rule that just says, look, we always do this. You don't have to, like the HEB store manager, they didn't have to have a meeting about it. They didn't have to have a meeting afterwards. Everyone
No.
understood that this is what we do. And when you create this coherence internally, you allow an ethos to really be carried on through generation after generation of managers.
And of course, it gives people agency, doesn't it? It's what you call the "but you are traffic," individual agency in any system. So every choice you make as an employer, consumer, citizen goes into somebody else's incentive structure, and you can have a lot of impact by doing very simple things, as you said.
I couldn't figure out, by the way, who to attribute the original insight of this is a thing I was taught to me years ago in a urban planning class or something, many years ago, this idea that people say, I'm frustrated because I'm stuck in traffic.
Mm.
And you say, no, you're not in traffic. You are traffic.
Mm.
You are creating the thing that you yourself
Yeah.
are complaining about, right? That's a very important metaphor to me. And
Mm.
I couldn't figure out I don't know. I still to this day don't know who to attribute this insight to originally. So, but it's important. It's in the book. And it is important. The book is mostly about structural
Yeah.
problems that require structural solutions, and depersonalizing these problems so that we can attack them structurally is very important. That's a critical tool that we have to have in our leadership toolbox. But I think it was important towards the end of the book to really ask the question of like, where do these forces come from?
Mm.
And what is the agency that we as individuals have? Because I think the most pernicious effect of this system is the way in which almost everyone I talk to today feels low agency.
Yeah.
We feel dispirited and like there's just nothing we can do. And it's interesting, there's these people who run and control all of our sources of information dissemination these days. And they are the most cynical people who are really focused on making sure that we all feel that there's nothing we can do. Our choices don't matter. Think about how sneering people are now. Even if they see that you're recycling or you're doing
Yeah.
you're buying the premium brand because they
Mhm.
have better environmental effects. Or it's like, oh, you're virtue signaling. Oh, your choices don't matter. Oh, you think you can solve the world's problems. We live in a time of tremendous condescension.
Yeah.
And it's like, if our choices don't matter, why do you spend so much money
Mm.
trying to convince us that this is so?
Mm.
Right? If
Mm.
it didn't matter, you wouldn't waste your time. So what's
Mm.
going on?
Mm.
And I think the tell is in the effort that is being exerted to convince us that there's nothing we can do, to, I think, mask the fact that we actually have surprising sources of power and leverage in the system as it's constituted today. So yes, the book is also in part about that.
Absolutely, and I think there are lots of examples in the book, like your long-term stock exchange and things like that, where we can impact and we can actually change structurally how much impact we can have. There are so many places we can go, and I'm going to be very mindful of time. What would you tell a founder, therefore, that's raising their first round this week and who wants to build something that is going to survive them and,
Mhm.
and the company they build? Because there are great examples in the book of how you've mentored and helped people, particularly with lawyers, discuss what this could look like.
Yeah. Okay. So for everyone who's in this situation right now, don't worry. I got you covered. Okay. There's a whole section in the book called How to Talk to Your Lawyer About This. There's a whole section called How to Talk to Your Investor About This. And there's
Mm.
yet a third section called How to Deal with People who are passive aggressively just asking questions
Yeah.
and using that to express their skepticism. Okay. So I got you covered. I have exactly what they're going to say and what you're going to say. All that is figured out. But zooming out for a second, I think most founders do not appreciate how much leverage and power they have at the beginning.
Mm.
Give it away so cheaply and then find themselves in a situation where now it's too late to make these changes. So yes, in the book, there are implementation guides for how to do this. There are many things that are really simple. Let me just pick one simple thing you can do. If you're a US Delaware C Corp, as the vast majority of venture-backed startups
Mm.
are. So if you're talking to a VC, they're probably going to insist that you become a Delaware C Corp if you're not already. Okay, great.
Mhm.
And there's an equivalent in many countries, obviously, but I live in the US, so we'll use that as the example. There is a simple 2-page legal filing you can do in Delaware. is called the PBC
Hmm.
filing, okay, Public Benefit Corp. All it does is restore the historical norm of writing into your corporate charter that the company exists to pursue some specific purpose, some public benefit. It's what it's called.
Hmm.
But you just write a little one paragraph about why the company exists, and you put that in the charter. You file it away. You do it once. It's extremely easy to do. Your lawyers can have this done for you tomorrow. If
Hmm.
your lawyers don't know what it is or they're acting kind of squirrely about it, I helped start a whole law firm called Virgil that you can check out at tryvirgil.com. Virgil is an AI-powered law firm, but among its many things that it does, this is one of the things that it does, because I feel like so many lawyers, when founders want to do mission protective things,
Hmm.
kind of be like, are you sure? I don't know. People might not like it. So we all want to be like, there's going to be at least one law firm in the world that does the right thing,
Hmm.
without
Hmm.
having to be asked. That's where, so you can check them out. It's very easy to do. Most VCs don't care. They're not going to be offended. They're not. This is not important to them. And Anthropic is a PBC. Most of the major AI companies are
Yeah.
PBCs these days. It's becoming a normalized thing to do. But if you do it now, before you've raised any money, it's easy. It takes an hour.
Hmm.
The more money you've raised, the more people that have to sign on to agree to this, because of course the law is very concerned with it. Was this properly disclosed to investors before they made their investment? And people are so convinced. Of course, my investors know that I'm long-term thinking, that I have this expansive pro-social vision for my company. And I'm like, are you sure they have that understanding? Are you completely sure? Is it in the diligence materials? Do you have a written record of them agreeing to it? A lot of times the answer is no. So at least if you're not doing anything else from the book, at least do this one thing.
And your book is optimistic and hopeful for the future. What is the one transformative thing you learned through this whole process of putting this book together?
Gosh, I learned a lot. The thing that gives me hope is, look, I don't want to sugarcoat this, okay? We live in very dark times.
Yeah.
Just read a newspaper. I mean, geez.
Mm.
Many of the things that are everyday occurrences today, in our childhood, we would have seen as dystopian.
Yes, totally.
And if you'd put them in a work of fiction, we would have said this is unrealistic.
Mm.
Unrealistic. So never want to sugarcoat how bad things are and how many people are being impacted right
Of
now
course.
by unjust and absolutely outrageous policies. Okay, well, that's true. But I have hope, and the reason is because if you study history at all, you realize how different our economic reality is from that of our grandparents. So much so that they would just look at so many of the things we do today
Mm.
and either laugh or cry. They'd be like, what are you doing? This is absurd. So many forms of corruption have been legalized. But to me, the fact that things have changed so much in such a short time implies that they could change again.
Yeah.
So could the economy of our grandchildren be unrecognizably different from the one we have today? Of course it could. And I just think that's the big thing. You have to remember that what was once made by human hands can be remade.
Brilliant.
And so let's get to work.
Yeah, nice. I'm going to leave our listeners with that call to action. Eric, thank you so much for coming and sharing your stories and your research and what's in your book. Where can people find out more about Incorruptible, what you do, and the resources that I know are behind it?
Yeah, lots of places you can go. Incorruptible.co is the main book website. You can find out where to buy the book and join our mailing list. That's definitely the best way to be in touch. I actually have a separate website that I have Claude Code maintain for me called howisincorruptiblegoing.com. If you want to see all the awards and bestseller lists and podcasts and all the cool stuff that's happening with the book. So many people ask me, how's it going? I was like, well, just go look here. Everything you want to know about how it's going, you can find it out there. And then, yes, if you want to stay in touch, email list is definitely the best way. But if you must use social media, keeping in mind that it's bad for your mental health, and I don't recommend it. You can also find me on all those social media platforms like you would expect. And then, yeah, for resources, okay, so this is all in the book, but you're also welcome to link it in the show notes. In the book, there are QR codes you can scan for reader's guides, implementation guides, something we call the advanced implementation guide, and the Incorruptible community. These are all practitioner resources for those who want to implement the ideas in the book. The reader's guide takes you through how to think these ideas through from many different perspectives. If you're a founder, if you're a board member, if you're an investor, if you're just a customer or an employee, like how might you use these tools? And the implementation guides are more geared to executives and board members and founders. And last, there's quite a few resources I mentioned. Virgil, if you want help on the legal side. On the website, we have a vendor's guide of many other aligned vendors who take this sort of thing seriously. So if you wanted to become a certified B Corp, or if you want to get involved in other communities, there's quite a lot of reformers who are thinking through what the new post-shareholder primacy economy should look like. And we want to make sure everyone who wants to gets connected to those resources. So there's a few things you can link to.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'll put them in the show notes. And thank you for being so generous. And thank you for being on this quest. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we covered a lot of ground, but if we come right back to where we started,
how to protect what you've built. The companies that last aren't the ones that avoid pressure. They're the ones that decided early what they would refuse to trade away. This is an ethical and a leadership question, one of organisational soulcraft. And it's one that every single person listening today gets to answer in some small way. We all possess more agency than we realise. And by consistently choosing actions that align with our organisational values, we can influence the collective direction of the company and what it is known for. Eric emphasises that when individuals recognise they are not just victims of a system, but they are the traffic within it, they reclaim the agency necessary to build and preserve truly meaningful organisations. We can also consciously create the conditions to maximise human flourishing as part of the way we work. We hope you enjoyed this episode and invite you to not only think about how you want your company to be protected and to thrive, but also how to create this movement to more purposeful and soulful organisations. I look forward to seeing you next time on Let's Talk Transformation.